welcome back to today's class. Today we'll be looking at periodization in history. Then what is periodization in history? Periodization in history is just a practice that involves the division of history into episodes, just the way you have episodes in movies. Like those of you that used to watch seasonal movie, you find out that in a seasonal movie, season 1, you have episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. And sometimes even in the episode, you'll be having series. So the division of this historical events, of historical stories into episodes is what is known as periodization in history. Let me say it again. The division of historical accounts into episodes, pauses, or periods is known as periodization in history. So how do we divide this historical account into episodes? They used significant events that happened in the past to divide these events. Let's say, for example, let's use the Nigerian Civil War. You find out that our parents who don't know when they were born, if you ask someone, when were you born? Well, the person will tell you, I was born before the war or after the war. So you see, that war that took place there is an event. So it's an event. They were able to use it to demarcate between those that were born before the war and those that were born after. So once someone tells that he was born after the war, immediately after the war, then definitely you should be checking that the person was born around 1970 to upward. If the person was born before the war, then definitely the person was born between 1967 downward. So you see now we're able to divide a historical account using the Civil War. So same again is applicable. In terms of history of education, history of philosophy, whatsoever it is, history, they have a uniform trend of dividing historical accounts. And this uniform trend of dividing historical accounts is what we consider as periodization in history. And in history of education and many other histories, events in history of education alongside many other history. When I mean about many other history here, I'm referring to history qua history. That's study of history on its own, or history of philosophy, history of science, history of church. That in aspect of theology and the rest of it, history of Christianity and so on. They divide events using a uniform trend. And what is this uniform trend? We have the pre-literate period, we have the ancient period, we have the medieval period, we have the modern period, and the contemporary period. So we also in history of education, we divide events, or let me say we divide our historical accounts on education based on this trend. So now we'll be taking them bit after bit. We'll first of all start with pre-literate period. Pre-literate period is a period characterized, or let me say it's a period when, from the word pre-literate, pre there means before, literate means writing. That's before writing. Pre-literate, before reading, before writing. That is to say that in that period, man does not know how to read nor write. That is why we call it pre-literate. But at that time, man does not know how to read nor write. And under this pre-literate period, we have a little series. We also break it down again into different series so that you can be able to remember there are certain things that characterize this pre-literate period. And what are these things? We will go to the very beginning. And the very beginning is that when man started, man was Homo agricola. What do we mean by Homo agricola? We mean that at that time, man's interest is only based on what he will eat. And since his interest is on what he will eat, man discovered agriculture. It was at this stage that man discovered agriculture. For those who did agriculture in secondary school, you remember when they were talking about the issue of agriculture, you heard that agriculture started when the early man ate fruit through the seed, and then when he came back to that same spot after some years, he discovered that that seed he threw germinated and grew into a tree, producing that same type of fruit. And then the man decided to start planting this seed. And before it was happening, agriculture started. Man started rearing animals. Man started cultivating different types of crops. So at that time, we consider man to be what? Homo agricola. Then as man become Homo agricola, now he can cultivate crops and settle in a particular place. He no longer wander about. And because he no longer wander about, you know there is procreation. They start having families. They start having neighbors. And there's a need for communication. And because the need of communication arises, man progressed from being Homo agricola to Homo loquens. What we mean by Homo loquens here is that man begins to speak. Man begins to speak. And we did history of language in GSP 101. And you will be able to understand that among the characteristics of language, we say that language is arbitrary. Language being arbitrary means that it was just an agreement between a group of people that let this sound represent this, and let this sound represent that. That is how language started. Let's, for example, when they make sound come, and all of them agree that when you hear come, it means that you should come close. You should come close. And when they say go, you go. And from then, language started. So man being Homo loquens make it very easy for them to communicate with each other. Then from there, man also progressed from being Homo loquens to Homo religiosus. What do we mean by Homo religiosus? It is at the time where man started feeling scared of himself and of the universe where he is. He started feeling that there is a need for a protection. There is a need for a protection. And also at that time, man started asking questions. How did tree come to be? Why? What makes the sun to rise in the morning and set in the evening? What is responsible for night and day? What's responsible for rainfall and the rest of it? Then man starts developing the concept of a supernatural being, which he calls God. And from then, man became religious. Man started worshipping something. Some decide to carve stone and start worshipping it. Some trees. Some worship water and so on. They started worshipping different type of things. Some people believe, okay, that there is a supernatural being that they cannot see. They worship an unseen God that they can't see. These are the things that characterize the pre-literate period. Then from the pre-literate period, we proceed to the next stage, which is the ancient period. Mind you that the pre-literate period, nobody knew when it started. Nobody knew when it started. But history have it that it ended around 3000 BC. And some books, some textbooks, when you read it, you will see that pre-literate period started around 3500 BC and ended 3000 BC. But nobody knows. So from pre-literate period, man progressed to another period, which is known as what? The ancient period. And this ancient period started 3000 BC, started around 3000 BC, started 3000 BC and ended 470 AD. Then what actually happened within this period that makes historians to classify it as ancient period? We are going to look at some of these events that took place within this period. And one of them is that it was at this ancient period that the act of writing began. Man began to write. Man, what brings about writing? Man wake up one day and felt that there is a need for him to start saving information, saving stories, saving events for his children and the next generation to come, so that they can be able to remember, to be able to transfer their culture to the next generation. So they felt there is a need. So then they started writing. History have it that the act of writing started in a place called Mesopotamia, which is the current day Iraq. One will be treating Oriental education. I'm going to say more about Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the rest of them. So writing started. They weren't using the papers we are using today to write. Then they were writing on rocks. From rocks, they progressed to papyrus and so on. Then from the act of writing to the development of cities, empires, and so on. It was during this period that empires and great cities like the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire, it was during this period that two of them flourished. And it was this period of it is during this ancient period too that we had great philosophers and thinkers that reshaped the educational system we have today. These great philosophers, we have some of them from the Greek and we have some of them from the Rome. And those from the Greek, we have people like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and so on. Then in the side of the Romans, we have people like, there are two that were very outstanding in shaping of our educational system, and those two outstanding ones are Cicero and Quintilian. Then this ancient period came to an end around 470 AD. How did it come to an end? It came to an end when Rome fell. It came at the end when Rome did what? Fell. And what happened? Rome fell into the hands of the barbarians around 470 AD. So let us just look at a little picture of some things that happened within this ancient period. Greek were in power, but Greek were in power for some time before Rome took over from them and became the world power. When Greek were in power, there was a fight that took place between Greeks and the Romans, and this fight took place in a place called Corinth. They call it the Battle in Corinth. At the end of this battle, Rome overpowered Greek, and Greek fell into the hands of Rome. Rome ruled the whole earth until 470 AD, when they finally fell into the hands of the barbarians. And immediately they fell. That marks the end of the ancient period, giving birth to another period which is called the medieval period. The fall of Rome led to a period in history known as the Dark Age. And this Dark Age is a period of interlude. What do we mean by Dark Age? You may see a question where you will be asked that you should discuss on Dark Age. What do we mean by Dark Age? Dark Age is a period of time where man stopped thinking. It's as simple as that. It's a period of time where man stopped thinking. What we mean by thinking here doesn't mean that people were not thinking normally. What we mean by thinking is that there was no writing on philosophy. Nobody had time for philosophy. Nobody was there because philosophy is all about love for wisdom. And at that time, what occupied the mind of everybody was to survive. Because at the end of when Rome fell, all those little cities that were under Rome were fighting against each other. Some were fighting to be independent, while some are fighting to colonize little towns that are close to them. So during that, and that thing resulted in what we call anarchy, a breakdown of law and order. And this led to the destruction of so many libraries, the killing of so many philosophers, and the destruction of so many things that even school have to close down. Everything closed down. So during those periods, there was nothing to record. So historians term that period Dark Age. The medieval period lasted from 500 AD to 1500 AD. After what ended the Dark Age was the rise of papacy, that is the church. When these issues were going on, the monks who have some of these works of these ancient philosophers tend to come up. At that time, the only means of people getting education then was through the church. And because people, after the end of the commotion and whatsoever it is that happened, everything was destroyed, and the only thing that were left were the little books few. The truth of the matter here is that Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Xenophon, these are not the only philosophers. But these are the only few whose records are still available. Because at the end of the Dark Age, many other philosophers' work were destroyed and were nowhere to be found till date. So the few that were left were the ones reserved by the Catholic monks. So these Catholic monks took it upon themselves to restore education. And in the process of restoring education, the church became very powerful. And when the church became powerful, the head of the church then was the Pope, because it was Roman Catholic Church. That was the only church in existence that time. So the Pope began to rule the world. The Pope were now in charge of everything. They were the ones ruling the world at that time. So that period is being termed, under that medieval period, that particular period when the church were in power and the Pope was the overall in charge, that period we term it rise of papacy, because the word papacy has to do with Pope. Then with the rise of papacy, as the church restoring education, they began to twist philosophy of these ancient Greek and Roman scholars with the Bible, giving rise in a confluence of theology and philosophy, whereby philosophy is being taught using the Bible. They are now teaching philosophy using the Bible. Then at the end of this medieval period, the next period that came in is now the period known as the modern period. And what marks the beginning of the modern period is a movement called Renaissance and Humanism. Renaissance and Humanism. Renaissance is a movement whereby the people started feeling the need to have access to philosophy in its raw form. People started going back to the arts of the Romans and the Greeks, at that time people started questioning theology, started questioning the church and certain beliefs of the church. And it was during this period that we witnessed the death of so many members of this Renaissance, which most of them are mostly scientists. So during those periods, people like Galileo Galilei was killed, and so many other people who tried to stand up against the teaching of the church, which they believe or which they feel are not right. So this Renaissance and Humanism, Renaissance is a movement that tries to question the stand of the church on philosophy, while humanism is like an idea. It's an idea used by the Renaissance. And this humanism believes that human beings are in the middle of the universe, and as such should be allowed to decide their fate by themselves, and that the action of a man should be determined by his but that the reaction of a man should be determined by his action, and not basically having to wait for a supernatural being to be the one to come and decide for them. Started questioning some of these things, and many of them were killed, whereby they say, okay, that what they say is heresy, and the rest of it, and they killed many of them. Like, if you study the history of science, you'll find out that someone like Galileo Galilei, when he came out and said that there are 9 planets, they think, how will you say that there is 9 planets when God only created heaven and earth? That is heresy. They killed him. But today we all know that we have 9 planets. The lady that came up and said that the earth, that time she said that the earth was round, which we know that the earth is actually spherical. They tell her that how can you say that the world is round? That the world is not round, that the world is flat. If it's round, that means we will walk and fall. They killed her. They killed many of them, but they kept fighting. So during those periods when they started this fight of Renaissance and humanism, marks the beginning of the modern period. Then this fight at some point led to the creation of nation state. What do we mean by nation state? Nation state means the way we have Nigeria, England, we have US, all these things are states. Nation state means country, creation of country. Then there was nothing like country. What they had that time was kingdoms. Kingdoms was what they had. So it was through this struggle that they started, that marks the creation of what? Nation states. Then after the creation of nation states, the next thing we start seeing was the decline of papacy. The church started losing its power because the nation state that were created now started having power. We started having governments. So when this government started coming out, people were no longer depending on the church. So there was a decline in papacy. The power of the church started declining. Power of the church started reducing. The decline of the papacy marks the end of the modern period and ushered in another period, which is known as the contemporary period. The contemporary period is a period between the last 100 years. The last 100 years is contemporary period, and this period is a period that is marked by a lot of innovations. We see a lot of science and technology. We see freedom of speech. We see a period whereby philosophy standing as the bane to which people take decisions. People no longer wait, okay, now what is the Bible saying about this? Sometimes you are free to choose whether you are going to depend on the Bible. You are free to say, okay, they're not even going to depend on the Bible. That is the contemporary period, and that's the period we are now, whereby you see that somebody can come out boldly and tell you that I am an atheist and nothing will happen. If you come out openly those days in the medieval period and say you are an atheist, they will kill you. You'll be killed. But now someone will come out openly and even question if God is existing. That is the contemporary period, and that is the period in which we are into right now. It's a period whereby school of thought determines a lot of things. Some people choose to be existentialism, some people choose existentialism, some people choose idealism, some people chose pragmatism, and so on. That is the period we are into now, a period of science and technology, a period whereby there is no end to whatever you want to do, a period of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. So these are the several periods involved in the periodization in history. That is how periodization in history was broken down. So like I said, periodization in history were broken down, starting from pre-literate period down to the next period, which is a period of what? Ancient period. After ancient period, we have medieval period. From medieval period, we had modern period, and then finally we have the contemporary period. So these are the stages, or these are the pulses or the episodes involved in the periodization of history of education. All right, I want to appreciate you for taking your time to watch this video, and more of these videos will be coming in, and I will advise you to subscribe to the channel so that you will not miss out in any of the next episode of the videos that I will be releasing. Thank you.